Hi students, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a scatter graph with Excel, and the data I'm using come from a simulation that looks at the enzyme lactase and how lactase works in different conditions. And so I am going to jump to my Excel spreadsheet that I've got opened already, so you should be able to access Excel. And I've opened a new sheet and I've put in some data that I've collected already. You'll be collecting data for exercise 5 on a simulation site that looks at how lactase breaks down lactose into glucose plus galactose. Glucose is one of the products. And we'll be looking at how fast this reaction happens or how well it happens under different conditions. In your exercise, you have to look at how pH affects the function of this enzyme. And I'm looking at, in my experiment, how temperature affects the function of this enzyme. And so I collected a lot of data by manipulating the temperature in that simulation, and I measured the product, which is glucose. Glucose is a product of the breakdown of lactose, right? So the more we have, the more reaction happened. I'm looking at mean glucose concentration. All right, so I took about 13, 14 different temperature measurements, and I changed the temperature, and then I measured, or I reported off of the graph, the mean glucose concentration. I think I did 20 samples per temperature. And I noticed that, I basically started at a low temperature and worked my way up. But I noticed that there was sort of a kind of a peak for a long range, all the way from 10 degrees to 20 degrees. We had 47 as the mean glucose concentration. And I sort of thought, wow, and even up here, we were at 46. So I wanted to add a few temperature readings to kind of find the absolute peak for my temperatures, the peak of glucose production. It looks pretty even across here, actually. All right, so after I measured them, I put my data into Excel. And the key is to put your data for the independent variable in the first column. The independent variable is the one you manipulate. Temperature in this case, temperature in degrees Celsius. I type that actually in, type in a title, and then I plot all I record all of the temperatures I've used. And then in the second column, I've put the mean glucose concentration. This is the dependent variable. It's the variable I'm measuring. I want to put that second in the second column. I put a title, and then I take all the data that I have and put them in. Now I'm ready to make my graph. For this particular graph, I want to make a scatter graph or an XY graph, a line graph. There's lots of terms for this. I don't need a bar graph. I'm not going to use standard error bars either because I don't have them. So I'm not going to worry about them. To make a graph, the first thing you need to do is highlight the area. Is highlight all of the data plus the titles. Okay. I've highlighted the titles and the data. Now I need to insert a graph. And oops, I'm sort of on home already. I'm the wrong thing already. I need to click on the menu Insert, and I have options for inserting different kinds of graphs. Like I could insert a bar graph or a chart here. I don't want to do that. I want to insert something that looks more like this, in a scatter or a bubble graph. Okay, and I have lots of options. For my example, I want to have a relatively smooth line connecting the dots of my different glucose concentrations. So, if I just sort of move my cursor over these different options, I can kind of pick the best option. This is a scatter graph without a line. This is kind of a smooth line. I like that. This is a line that's connecting dot to dot. I'd rather have a smooth line, I guess. They're pretty similar, though, at this point. I don't think I need something without the dots. I want to see the actual data points. And I definitely don't need a bubble. Those look crazy. So I'm going to pick, in this case, the scatter with smooth lines and the markers. I want them to show up. So I'm going to click on that, and voila, I've got my graph made. Now I need to do some fixing up. first things I look at is I don't really like titles. We are going to put all of our information in the figure caption. So I'm going to delete that by just highlighting it and clicking delete. I also don't like all these grid lines. So I'm going to take away the vertical grid lines by clicking on them and hitting delete. I'm going to take away the horizontal ones. Okay, now things are looking good, except now I don't have any axes titles. I need to include those. So I'm going to go to my chart elements icon over here on the right, this plus symbol, and click on it, and I can do all sorts of things, but I definitely want to add axis titles. I can just click this, and now I've got some axis titles, but I need to click on them and delete the word axis title, or the words, and type in this case, I'm going to type in the mean glucose concentration, mean glucose concentration in millimoles. Oops, there we go. And make sure I keep my units in there. And then on the x-axis, I'm going to type in temperature in degrees Celsius, right? So in parentheses, I'm putting the, I can't see what I've written here. I'm spelling it wrong. Yeah, this is great. Okay, that's still spelled wrong, people. This is how it goes. Life is like that. All right, so I may have to make these a little bit bigger. I could click on them and change the font size, I believe, by just going to Home and making the font size a little bit bigger. That looks a little nicer. Mean glucose concentration is probably big enough. Maybe I can change it to 11. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so now I can see the data, and it looks like there's kind of a peak optimal temperature for this enzyme to react, to work the best, anywhere from 10 to 25, 26, what I hit, 25 degrees. And then you see it dropping off pretty quickly after that. And you see it dropping off on the other side of 10 degrees. So we have kind of a big peak here. I'm going to write about that in my figure caption. I don't have a lot more to add to this graph. If I had made standard error or standard deviation measurements, I would have to include those also on my graph, but I didn't do that from my simulation. So I'm going to leave it the way it is. I'm going to show you how to make standard errors some other time on a second video, but I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy and paste it, so I just hit Control-C so that I can paste it into my exercise assignment. And then I'm going to have to add a good figure caption. So you're going to have to go back and think about, what do we need? Figure 1, we need a title. We need a description of how I collected the data. You can even say, I used a simulation, and tell us, you can give me the URL for that simulation and tell us what you measured or what you changed, and then what you measured. And then tell us the results. Tell us, is there a peak? For this, the optimal temperature for my enzyme seems to be a big range from about 10 to 25. And so I'd want to include that in my caption too. Okay, so I've copied and I paste this into my document, and then I typewrite a figure caption right under it. And then I'm done. So voila, I've just made a pretty good graph in Excel. Thank you so much. We'll talk about error bars some other time.